Yes, indeed. And we said at the beginning of the show that we'd have two questions about Ross Smith, so we'll follow through with that. We'll have our second, and it's a question about surprises. And it's a surprising day. Atletico Madrid managed to finish bottom of their group in Champions League. Middlesbrough, of all teams, is winning the game in the championship. So we're all about the surprises right now. Is Ross Smith, though, the most surprising first-time winner ever of a PDC major title?
That is a surprise that Middlesbrough are winning. And I think in terms of surprising winners in the PDC, as far as winning a first major title, we've put this out as one of our other questions of the week. And thanks to everyone who's voted, got in touch with their thoughts, because at the moment, 65% of our listeners saying yes, Ross Smith is the most surprising, 35% going with no. And I'll read out a few tweets that we've had from our listeners. Jacob Starkey saying, I'd say he is, but I think Johnny Clayton was at the time he won the Masters. Obviously gone on to great things, but I don't think many were expecting the Ferret to win a TV title. Good friend of the show, Warren Allsworth, he said the only other that possibly comes close was Kevin Painter winning the Players' Championship finals. Not because Kevin wasn't a brilliant player, but more down to the timing. Wim has said Larry Butler, I would say, but a good second place for Ross. And Gary Aston agreeing Larry Butler, I admit you have to be older than the cool guys to remember. And it is a real tough question. I think, first of all, we should say, by saying someone's the most surprising, that is not diminishing their achievement, saying that they're a rubbish player, didn't deserve to win the title, because everyone that wins a major title, the performances they put in, they deserve to be a major champion. It's just something that we have in sport where we do get some surprise players, some surprise teams pull off these results, and they're not fancy to do it. You have got more players, more teams that are maybe more fancied, got more of a pedigree, but you look at Ross Smith and the odds, as I mentioned earlier, 150 to 1, I think he was quoted to win a title. And the seed that he had for the tournament, 27th seed, performances that he's had on stage over the last few years. Okay, he had a couple of quarterfinals on the Euro Tour this year, and his last quarterfinal on TV, the 2019 UK Open. So I think he had 15 TV tournaments since then. He's gone out early in all of them, but to put it all together in a major, the run he had as well, and I think the start of the final day, he was the outsider 14 to 1 to win the tournament. So I think I would put him in my top 5 most surprising first-time major winners. And looking at a top 5, I need to have a bit more time to think of the order, but I think I'll put Ross Smith in there, working backwards now. Robert Thornton, 2012 UK Open. Okay, he was a former major winner in the BDO, but you look at his results on TV, had a rotten year in the lead up to that UK Open, and the run that he had to win that title as well, beating Phil Taylor in the final. Working further back, I think Kevin Painter, who Warren mentioned, I think he's definitely worth a mention. And okay, he's a former World Championship finalist, but it'd been a little while since he'd had a deep run on TV, and some may have thought his time as a potential major winner may have gone. And the year before that, the same tournament, Paul Nicholson, the Players' Championship finals, he'd got out early in all the TV events that year, and to come away with a title, I think it was the January that event was held, so the following year was took some doing, and the run that he had to that title as well was very impressive, but a little bit surprising, it's got to be said. And the last one in my top 5, I will go with Larry Butler, the 94 World Match Play, the draw. Fair to say it did open up for him, but to play a seed, his first seed that he played in the tournament was the final. He did play the number 1 seed, Dennis Priestley, and what a performance he was to win that. But yeah, he was certainly a surprise winner. So they're my top 5. Ross Smith, he's definitely in the top 5, but I'm going to have a little think to see where he does rank in my top 5, I think.
Yeah, you said a lot of the ones, though you didn't say one that I was going to say as the potential rivals to this. And the one that jumped out at me was Paul Nicholson's Players' Championship final in 2010, because there had been nothing in his CV up to that date that made you think that he would win that. He had not won a PDC title outside of Australia of any sort prior to that. I think one of his titles was a PDC event in Australia the previous year, but most of the top players didn't go down to Australia to play those events. A few did, but most didn't. And he obviously didn't have to travel nearly as far because he was still living in Australia at the time, and maybe he had just started to move over to play in the events in the UK and Europe. But there was nothing that made you think entering February 2010, that he was the player who was going to do that. He had lost the first round of the World Championships just a month earlier. And I believe, you would have to ask him, but I believe he has said that he was thinking about calling it quits and going back and not continuing playing the PDC circuit prior to that weekend. And what did he do? He only went and won the title. And it wasn't like the draw was nice to him. Okay, Dennis Priestley was clearly past his peak, and he played him in the first round. But he played a on-song Steve Beaton, who was playing as good, if not better, darts than he had been at any point in his PDC career heading into that event. He had just made a final of the European Championship the year before. That was not a televised event that year. It was the one year it wasn't televised, but it was his only major final in PDC competition. Later the year, he'd make the semifinals at the Grand Slam. So this was Steve Beaton playing at his PDC best. Paul Nicholson beat him. He then beat Adrian Lewis, who was already a player to be reckoned with, although not yet a world champion. And then he only beat Phil Taylor after putting Phil Taylor in. Nicholson won the darts in that match and chose to let Phil Taylor throw first. And he still beat Phil Taylor in a last leg decider. And then 20 minutes later, he came back and beat Mervyn King. It was highly unexpected that he would win it when the weekend started. It was highly unexpected that he would win it when the final started against Mervyn King, and yet he still managed to do that. The Kevin Painter one's a good shout as well, which you talked about, but I want to talk about one other one I think is a really surprising one. It might not jump out because the player's a 3-time world champion, but entering the 2008 World Championship, I don't think anyone thought John Part was a serious chance to win. Okay, a year and a half earlier, he had won the Las Vegas Desert Classic, but outside of that one event, or that event in Vegas, he had barely done anything on television since making the final of the World Match Play 2.5 years earlier. He made a semifinal in the World Grand Prix the previous year, just a few months earlier, but it wasn't a semifinal that he was playing all that well in. He was probably the weakest, or certainly I think the weakest of the semifinalists that year. He had beaten Andy Hamilton in a match that Andy Hamilton didn't play well in. He beat Wayne Mardle, who was already on the decline. And he beat Adrian Gray in the quarterfinals when Adrian Gray had obviously beaten Phil Taylor in that famous first-round match. And that's how he got to the semifinals. And then Terry Jenkins beat him in the semifinals. But beyond that, he had not done anything on television for a year and a half. And outside of the event in Las Vegas, hadn't done anything on television in 2.5 years. So there was really nothing to make you think that John Part was going to roll back the years, and he did. And he played really well throughout that tournament, and that's why he ended up going on to win the World Championship. And yes, okay, he got lucky. There was no Phil Taylor waiting in the final. There was not even Wayne Mardle waiting in the final. There was Kirk Shepard. But that doesn't underscore what he did along the way to get there, beating James Wade in the quarterfinal, beating Mensur Suljovic. We didn't know it at the time, but Mensur Suljovic was a darn good player and averaged over 90 that match. Beat him in the second round. Beat Kevin Painter, who a couple years later, as you mentioned, would win a major title in the semifinal. It was not an expected, by any stretch of the imagination, run. And to do it when it mattered the most was really a bit surprising, but John Part. He surprised us before, and he would surprise us again, making the quarterfinals out of nowhere behind closed doors at the UK Open 10 years later. But those are the three I would mention, but I'm going to say Paul Nicholson's is first.